At 65, Ronnie Lott has reached the age where legends stop running from their own history. When a man whose name became synonymous with fear finally pauses long enough to look back, the truth that emerges is rarely clean. His legacy has always been told through collisions, through the echo of shoulder pads cracking under impossible force, through stories of receivers who changed their entire route tree because they wanted no part of him. But behind the violence lay a darker ledger, a set of hidden truths he carried through every snap, every championship, every broken hand and fractured bone he refused to acknowledge until the game was over. For decades, he was celebrated as the enforcer of San Francisco, an immovable pillar in the dynasty that defined the 1980s. Yet the deeper story was not written in trophies. It was written in grudges that shaped him long before the world knew his name, in betrayals that hardened him in moments of rage that even teammates whispered about long after he left the locker room. The public saw a warrior. The men who lined up beside him saw something else, a storm that refused to die. Tonight, those truths finally rise to the surface. This is not the clean, polished version of Ronnie Lott that NFL films immortalized. This is the version he kept buried, the side he rarely allowed anyone to see. The question is simple. Why did one of the greatest defensive backs of all time carry so many battles inside him long after the game itself ended? Ronnie Lott entered the NFL as more than a first-round pick. He arrived as a force the league had not fully prepared for. Born in the late 1950s and shaped by the unforgiving discipline of his father, a military man who demanded precision in every aspect of life, Lott carried an intensity that felt different from the moment he stepped onto a field. At the University of Southern California, he transformed that intensity into dominance, becoming the kind of defensive back who changed the geometry of an offense. Quarterbacks avoided his side of the field. Receivers hesitated before crossing the middle. Coaches built game plans around surviving him rather than challenging him. When the San Francisco dynasty began to form, under Bill Walsh, Lott became its tone setter. In a team defined by offensive genius, he was the violent heartbeat that balanced elegance with brutality. His presence gave the dynasty something it otherwise lacked, a raw edge that made finesse feel dangerous. Every empire requires both architects and warriors. Lott was the warrior who made the architect's vision possible. His teammates knew it. Opponents feared it. The league adapted to it. But greatness on that scale always comes with a price. Lott was not just a hitter. He was a man forged in confrontation. His competitive fire consumed everything around him. Teammates admired him, yet some kept their distance. Coaches trusted him, yet they braced for the emotional volatility that came with his leadership. He pushed the locker room as hard as he pushed himself. He inspected effort. He demanded pain tolerance. He expected sacrifice because he lived by it. The standard he carried was not negotiable. The defining symbol of that standard came in 1985, when he made the choice that would echo for generations. Faced with a shattered finger and a timeline that threatened to pull him out of the playoff run, he told doctors to cut the tip off. It was a moment that became myth, a testament to an athlete who valued the team more than his body. Yet behind the legend lay a truth that was far more complicated. Pain was not the enemy to him. Vulnerability was. Lott feared being seen as less than unbreakable. He feared hesitation more than injury. That fear shaped the way he approached every opponent, every relationship, every battle. Through 4 Super Bowl titles, he evolved from a young corner to a roaming safety whose presence changed the temperature of a stadium. He became a cultural figure, a symbol of old-school toughness in a league trying to modernize. But beneath the applause, beneath the highlight reels, lay a lifetime of unresolved conflicts that never fully faded. Those battles, both internal and against men, he saw as obstacles would become the hidden truths that defined his journey long after the final whistle. Kenny Easley was one of the few defensive backs in the 1980s whose presence could rival Ronnie Lott's. A Seattle icon with rare instincts, he played with a style that blended grace and violence in a way that made him one of the most feared safeties of his era. He was a Defensive Player of the Year, a franchise cornerstone, and the heartbeat of the Seahawks defense. Fans saw him as a once-in-a-generation talent. Players saw a predator with an ability to erase entire sections of the field. Easley was not just good, he was terrifying. For Ronnie Lott, greatness was measured by impact. For Kenny Easley, it was measured by dominance. Both men viewed the field as their territory. Both saw themselves as the enforcer who dictated the rules of engagement. Their rivalry was not born from words. It was born from identity. They played the same position, carried the same reputation, and chased the same legacy. Media comparisons fueled the fire. Analysts asked who was the true standard of the era. Opposing coaches debated who could control a game more completely. Lott respected Easley's talent, but disliked the suggestion that anyone could match his intensity. Easley respected Lott's resume, but resisted the idea that San Francisco's dynasty made him untouchable. The tension deepened with every interview and every headline. The rivalry ignited in 1984 when the 49ers and Seahawks collided in a game that felt less like football and more like a territorial war. Early in the first quarter, a receiver drifted across the middle and Ronnie Lott closed in with his trademark precision. But before he could deliver the blow, Easley arrived, first launching through the receiver with a hit that sent a shock through the stadium. Lott watched the aftermath, watched the crowd roar for someone else, and felt a spark of something rare inside him. Not fear, but challenge. On the next defensive series, Lott answered. Seattle ran a sweep, and the running back bent toward the sideline, lowering his shoulder. Lott met him at full speed, folding him into the turf with a collision so violent that teammates winced. He rose without expression, staring across the field at Easley, who stared back. For the rest of the game, they played as if they were trying to outdo one another, each hit louder than the last, each tackle a message. The cameras caught it. The league noticed it. It was the first time Ronnie Lott looked across the field and saw a reflection of himself, someone who refused to yield. But the moment that defined the rivalry came years later. Easley's career abruptly collapsed due to kidney failure, a tragedy that stunned the league. Reporters asked Lott if Easley had been his greatest challenger. Lott paused, then said only that Easley had been a powerful player. It sounded polite. It was anything but. Ronnie Lott admired Kenny Easley, yet never forgave the comparisons. To him, the position demanded absolute supremacy, and Easley had been the only threat to that throne. Easley's decline ended the rivalry, but not the tension. Lott carried the belief that only one enforcer could define the era, and he refused to share that crown. The cold truth is simple. Kenny Easley was the one opponent who made Ronnie Lott question whether the field truly belonged to him alone, and that was something he never admitted until years later. Drew Pearson was the voice and soul of the Dallas Cowboys offense throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, a receiver whose clutch performances became legend. He was known for precision poise and an uncanny ability to seize the biggest moments. Fans remember the Hail Mary catch in Minnesota. Teammates remember a leader who commanded respect without raising his voice. Pearson played with craft rather than brute force. But he was fearless when crossing the middle of the field, and that fearlessness brought him directly into the path of Ronnie Lott. At the exact moment, Lott was redefining what danger looked like in the secondary. The tension between Pearson and Lott dated back to the early 1980s, when Dallas still carried the aura of America's team and San Francisco was emerging as the new power. Pearson believed in technical mastery and route discipline. Lott believed in intimidation and impact. When Pearson studied film of the young 49ers defense, he saw one thing above all else, a defender who hit. Not to stop a play, but to make a statement. Pearson publicly remarked that some of Lott's shots bordered on unnecessary, a comment that circulated quickly. Lott took it personally. To him, it sounded like judgment from a veteran who had never lived in the violent corners of the field where Lott made his home. The defining clash came during the 1981 NFC Championship game, a brutal contest overshadowed by the catch, but remembered in locker rooms for its collisions. Early in the second quarter, Pearson ran a deep in route, trusting the timing he had perfected with his quarterback. As he planted and turned, Lott swept in like a shadow, delivering a hit that stopped Pearson mid-stride. The air left Pearson's body. The stadium fell silent for a moment before roaring. Lott stood over the play, briefly not taunting, simply reminding everyone that entering his territory required a price. But Pearson was not intimidated. On the next drive, he lined up again, refusing to alter his route. He caught a crucial third down pass and turned upfield only to be met once more by Lott, who struck with the same force. The crowd reacted to the collision as if watching two worlds collide. After the game, reporters asked Pearson about the hits. He admitted Lott was the hardest hitter he had ever faced, but added that a defender who relies on violence more than skill would not outlast time. Lott heard the quote and never forgot it. Years later, the rivalry resurfaced when Hall of Fame discussions placed Pearson and Lott in the same breath. Pearson claimed defensive backs had been allowed to play beyond the edge during Lott's prime. Lott viewed the comments as a second insult, a final attempt to diminish what he had built. Ronnie Lott respected Drew Pearson's courage, but never forgave the suggestion that his greatness came from brutality rather than brilliance. To Lott, every hit had purpose. Every collision was calculated. Pearson saw danger. Lott saw discipline. The cold truth is that Pearson became the embodiment of every criticism Lott carried throughout his career. A reminder that no matter how many championships he won, some would always question his methods. And that was a wound Lott never let heal. Jerry Rice is often remembered as the most precise, disciplined, and relentless wide receiver the NFL has ever produced. His work ethic became the blueprint for every generation that followed, and his record book reads like a monument carved in stone. To fans, he was the perfect professional. To teammates, he was an obsession given human form. But with Ronnie Lott, the relationship was never simple. They arrived on the same dynasty. They chased the same standard. They built championships together. Yet beneath the trophies, a quiet tension grew between the enforcer who controlled fear and the perfectionist who controlled excellence. The friction between Rice and Lott lived in the smallest details. Rice believed every mistake could be erased by repetition. Lott believed every mistake demanded accountability. When Rice dropped passes during his early practices with the 49ers, Lott pushed him harder than any veteran on the roster. Rice later admitted that he feared failing in front of Lott more than any coach. Their mindsets clashed. Rice saw Lott as judgmental. Lott saw Rice as untested and too focused on individual mastery rather than physical dominance. As Rice grew into a superstar, he began to overshadow the defensive leaders of the dynasty. Media attention shifted. Lott felt the narrative tilting away from the toughness that had built the foundation of the franchise. The tipping point came in 1986 during a practice session that players still whisper about. The offense had struggled all morning. Walsh demanded sharper execution. Rice ran a post route and mistimed his cut, allowing the ball to slip through his hands. Lott exploded toward him, not with a hit but with words. He told Rice that greatness was not earned through routines. It was earned through pain, through sacrifice, through the willingness to confront fear. Rice fired back, insisting that precision mattered as much as power. The exchange grew heated until teammates pulled them apart. A few weeks later, in a game against Philadelphia, Rice caught a slant and turned upfield. Lott, playing deep safety, closed fast to protect the angle. Rice broke free from tacklers and sprinted to daylight. After the score, he pointed toward the sideline, a gesture subtle enough to be denied, but obvious enough that Lott understood. Something had shifted. The receiver no longer feared the enforcer. Their relationship softened with time, but never fully lost its edge. When Rice broke records, Lott praised him publicly, while privately insisting that the dynasty had been built on defense first. When Lott left the 49ers, Rice said the locker room felt different without him, but stopped short of calling him the heart of the team. Both men understood the truth. They needed each other to rise, but they resented each other in ways neither would discuss openly. Ronnie Lott admired Jerry Rice's perfection, but struggled with the shadow it cast. Rice's rise changed the identity of the dynasty from fear to finesse. Lott respected him profoundly, yet carried a quiet resentment that the world celebrated precision more than punishment. The cold truth is that Rice became the only teammate who challenged Lott's authority within his own empire. And for a man who built his legend on control, that was a truth he never found peace with. Mike Singletary was the eyes of the Chicago Bears defense, a middle linebacker whose stare alone could shake the resolve of an entire offense. He played with an emotional force that felt volcanic, erupting in bursts of leadership, intensity, and discipline. His instincts were legendary. His speeches were defining. His presence turned the Bears of the mid-1980s into a defensive myth. For most players, facing Singletary was a test. For Ronnie Lott, it became something much deeper, a collision between two men who defined toughness in entirely different ways. The tension between Lott and Singletary began with respect, but evolved into rivalry through a decade of comparisons. Singletary believed in spiritual discipline, inner balance, and a leadership style built on emotional clarity. Lott believed in fear, physical punishment, and relentless pressure. They were mirrors that refused to reflect each other. When analysts debated the toughest defender of the era, the conversation always drifted toward these two. Singletary was the general who directed chaos. Lott was the blade that cut through it. Each saw the other as a threat to the identity they had built. The Chicago defense was proclaimed the greatest of the decade. San Francisco countered with rings. Pride sharpened the divide. Their rivalry crystallized in 1985 when the 49ers and Bears met in a battle loaded with historical weight. Chicago was at its peak, driven by Singletary's control of the middle. San Francisco was still raw, from earlier success determined to reclaim dominance. On the first defensive series, Lott chased down a running back along the sideline and delivered a hit that sent the crowd into a frenzy. As he rose, he locked eyes with Singletary across the field. The message was unmistakable. He was not there to survive. He was there to challenge the throne. Later in the game, the Bears ran a crossing route aimed directly at exploiting San Francisco's secondary. The receiver caught the ball and burst into the open, only to be crushed by Lott, with a collision that echoed through Soldier Field. Singletary stormed into the huddle on the next play, rallying his defense with a fire that bordered on rage. He responded on the following series by splitting a double team and flattening the 49ers running back. It was no longer a game. It was two men using the field as their battlefield. After the Bears defeated the 49ers that season, Singletary made a comment that cut deep. He said the Chicago defense succeeded because they did not rely on intimidation, but on purity of execution. Lott viewed the words as a dismissal of everything he represented. Years later, when the 49ers reclaimed their dominance, Lott privately admitted he still carried that slight. Ronnie Lott respected Mike Singletary as a leader, but never forgave the implication that discipline outweighed ferocity. Singletary symbolized a different version of toughness, one that challenged Lott's philosophy at its core. The cold truth is that Singletary was the only defender who made Lott feel overshadowed without ever stepping into his territory. Their rivalry was built on respect but hardened by pride, and it remained a quiet storm that neither man fully acknowledged even decades later. Charles Haley was the most volatile force of the 49ers dynasty, a pass rusher whose brilliance came packaged with a fury that could split a locker room in half. He was a rare talent, explosive, off the edge, unpredictable, in every sense capable of destroying a game plan on his own. Haley played with a rage that teammates struggled to understand, and opponents feared immediately. To fans, he was chaotic genius. To coaches, he was necessary danger. But to Ronnie Lott, he became something far more complicated, a storm he tried to control, but eventually lost. The tension between Lott and Haley began with loyalty. Lott was the enforcer who demanded discipline for the sake of the team. Haley was the rebel who demanded space for the sake of his own fire. When Haley erupted at coaches, Lott confronted him. When Haley lashed out at teammates, Lott stepped between him and the rest of the room. Their relationship bounced between brotherhood and explosion. Haley admired Lott's leadership, but hated being policed. Lott respected Haley's talent, but feared the instability he brought. Their clashes became louder as Haley's role grew. Pride collided with responsibility. Authority collided with chaos. And in the middle stood two men too powerful to bend. The defining moment came in 1989 during a week when tension in the 49ers facility felt thick enough to cut. Haley had erupted during a film session, shouting at coaches and storming out. Lott tracked him down in the locker room and confronted him directly. What happened next became whispered legend inside the franchise. Haley launched into a tirade about being disrespected, about the coaches ruining his game, about teammates failing to understand him. Lott fired back, reminding him that the dynasty was bigger than any one player and that chaos would not be tolerated. Haley stepped closer. Lott did not move. Voices rose. Teammates watched, unsure if fists or words would land first. Then, Haley struck a locker with his fist, denting the metal. Lott grabbed him by the shoulder pads, pulling him inches from his face. He told Haley that talent without control destroys more than it builds. Haley growled that fear was control. The argument nearly turned violent before teammates separated them. The next Sunday, Haley delivered a performance for the ages, recording multiple sacks and wreaking havoc across the field. After the game, he told reporters he played with anger, fueled by people trying to limit him. Lott understood the message. It was aimed at him. Their relationship never recovered. When Haley was later traded to Dallas, Lott privately admitted it was the moment he knew the dynasty was changing. The team had chosen to release the storm rather than tame it. And for the first time in years, Lott felt powerless. Ronnie Lott admired Charles Haley's raw brilliance, but never forgave the chaos it brought into the heart of the dynasty. Haley represented the one challenge Lott could not intimidate, correct, or command. Their battles shaped the locker room and left scars that lingered long after they parted ways. The cold truth is that Haley was the only man who could shake the foundation Lott believed he controlled. And facing that reality forced Lott to confront a truth he rarely admitted. Even legends can be undone from within. John Taylor was one of the most gifted, yet understated receivers of the 49ers era, a man whose quiet brilliance often lived in the shadow of Jerry Rice. He was the clutch play, waiting in the dark, the insurance policy of the West Coast offense, the receiver who thrived when chaos struck. To fans, he was reliable. To teammates, he was humble. But to Ronnie Lott, Taylor represented a different type of tension, one built not on rivalry or violence, but on responsibility and the weight of expectation. Taylor was the kind of player who kept mistakes to himself. When he ran a route imperfectly or missed a read, he internalized it. Lott despised internalization. He believed accountability must be spoken, confronted, and exposed. In meetings, Taylor stayed quiet. Lott pushed him. In practices, Taylor tried to avoid conflict. Lott sought it. Their dynamic became a quiet strain that the outside world never detected. The defining moment came during a late-season practice when the offense had stalled repeatedly. Taylor dropped a pass over the middle, an uncharacteristic mistake. Lott approached him and demanded an explanation. Taylor simply nodded and walked back to the huddle. The silence enraged Lott more than any argument. He confronted Taylor again, telling him that silence was weakness, and weakness endangered the team. Taylor stared back, calm but firm, and said that not every battle needed noise. The exchange left Lott unsettled. Here was a teammate he respected deeply yet could not shape. Taylor embodied a different strength one Lott could not command. For a man whose leadership depended on emotional force, it was a rare and uncomfortable truth. The unspoken tension never turned toxic, but it lingered for years. And the coldest truth was simple. John Taylor was the reminder that not every warrior needs to roar. For Ronnie Lott, that was a lesson he spent a lifetime trying to understand. As the years passed and the noise of rivalries slowly faded, the full weight of Ronnie Lott's journey began to reveal its true shape. His story had always been wrapped in collisions, in moments frozen on film, where bodies twisted, helmets snapped back, and crowds erupted. But underneath all of those memories lived something far more complicated. Every rivalry he carried, every confrontation, every unspoken resentment, formed the architecture of a legacy that was built not on perfection, but on conflict. Lott was not merely a defender. He was the sum of every battle he faced and every truth he tried to keep buried. The men who challenged him shaped the man he became. Kenny easily forced him to confront his own insecurity, the fear that someone else could match his dominance. Drew Pearson exposed the uncomfortable truth that not everyone saw violence as art. Jerry Rice reminded him that discipline and precision could eclipse intimidation even inside the same dynasty. Mike Singletary showed him what leadership looked like when rooted in spiritual grounding rather than rage. Charles Haley revealed that raw brilliance could not always be controlled, and John Taylor, quiet and steady, taught him that not all strength needs a voice. Together they formed the storm that followed Lott through every season. They were not his enemies. They were the mirrors he tried to look away from. Each one reflected a version of Ronnie Lott he did not always want to see. A challenger, a critic, a rival, a reminder, a warning. In the heart of the dynasty, what made Lott extraordinary was not simply the violence he delivered, but the burden he carried. He played as if every snap mattered more than the last. He demanded the same from everyone around him. He believed greatness required sacrifice, so he treated sacrifice as currency. His teammates respected him for it. Some resented him for it. But all of them understood that the championships they won were tethered to the pain he embraced. Behind closed doors, Lott became the emotional anchor of one of the greatest eras in football history. He broke down film until his eyes throbbed. He held teammates accountable in ways that bordered on brutal. He played through injuries that would end other careers. He gave so much of himself that by the end of each season, he felt like a hollowed shell, rebuilt only by the next challenge. He knew no other way to live. The collisions were not punishment, they were purpose. Yet as he grew older, Lott learned that purpose has a cost. The rivalries never left him. They lived in the back of his mind as unfinished chapters. He thought about Easley's early dominance. He thought about Pearson's public criticisms. He thought about Rice's ascent. He thought about Singletary's leadership overshadowing his own in the public eye. And he thought about Haley, the one storm he could never calm. These memories did not haunt him. They defined him. They created a silhouette much larger than the myth the league preserved. The truth that emerged years later was simple. Ronnie Lott was not shaped by the hits he delivered. He was shaped by the men who refused to back down from him. Each of them drew lines in the dirt that forced him to evolve. He became smarter because Easley existed. He became tougher because Pearson did not yield. He became more disciplined because Rice overtook him in the spotlight. He became more introspective because Singletary challenged the meaning of toughness. He became more aware of the limits of leadership because Haley shattered those limits repeatedly. And he became more patient because John Taylor showed him that silence could be strength. As Lott approached the later years of his career, he began to understand what truly defined him. It was not the championships, although they mattered. It was not the highlight tapes or the legendary plays, although they endured. It was the identity he carved out of conflict. He learned that greatness is never clean. It is forged in struggle, in moments of fear, in fractures of pride, in the space between dominance and doubt. The story of Ronnie Lott is the story of a man who lived on the edge of control. He demanded more from himself than from anyone else, yet he feared the moments when others could match the fire he carried. His toughness was real, but so were the insecurities he hid. His leadership was powerful, but so were the grudges that fueled it. His greatness was undeniable, but so were the scars that came with it. And in the end, those scars became the purest proof of his legacy. Ronnie Lott was a defender who changed the geometry of football. But the deeper truth is that he was also a man shaped by the pressure of proving himself every single Sunday. His enemies were never the men across the field. They were the shadows inside him. Ronnie Lott's story reminds us that greatness is never shaped by trophies alone. It is sculpted by pressure, by doubt, by the people who dared to challenge a legend when he was still becoming one. His journey proves that the hidden truths behind a career often matter more than the moments captured on film. They reveal the fears he carried, the confrontations he survived, and the shadows he refused to run from. These are the pieces of history that rarely make headlines, but define the soul of a player long after. The roar of the stadium fades. Now the question becomes yours to answer. Which rivalry shaped Ronnie Lott the most in your eyes? Was it the silent tension with John Taylor, the emotional collision with Mike Singletary, the explosive battles with Charles Haley, or the challenge of sharing a dynasty with Jerry Rice? Perhaps it was the early fire sparked by Kenny Easley, or the lingering criticism from Drew Pearson. Each one left a mark, each one changed him, and each one forces us to rethink what truly built his legacy. If you found meaning in uncovering these hidden truths, consider joining us for more stories from football's golden age. This channel exists to bring light to the histories that were never fully told, to the rivalries that shaped legends, and to the moments that built the modern game. Subscribe to NFL Hidden Truths so you never miss the next journey into the past, where the myths fade and the truth finally speaks.